Welcome to the end of the chain. I am your host, Samuel McCullough, and this week we have Brad Cam from Unstoppable Domains. He came to the podcast to talk about freedom to have open domains and building an architecture based on independence and freedom, which is pretty cool. But I think I pressed him on quite a few questions. It was a great podcast. If you like what we're doing here at the end of the chain, make sure to subscribe and share with your friends. We have a growing listener base, and I want to thank you all. All right, let's hop into the podcast. Today, we are joined by Brad Cam from Unstoppable Domains. And I thought it was really interesting to have you on, Brad, because one of the things that's come up in the last couple of years has been people taking a look at ICANN again and what it actually means to own a domain and who's controlling domains and what power they have to manage and run those domains. I know that there's been a lot of controversy with the .org, which was almost sold out to a hedge fund. And then additionally, there's been persistent use of the U.S. government to control the .coms and the other domains that it controls. So welcome to the podcast, and it's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I think we should probably start with, the birthing of the consumer internet. In the 1990s, there was this idea that, in order to get mainstream people to use the internet, they were never going to type in things like 34.572.58, IP addresses. And so at the start of the internet, that was the way that you would go and find a website. And so the idea was, okay, well, we need to have some sort of human readable name, and we can point that human readable name to the IP address. And then we would be able to go and tell somebody, hey, go check out my website, hotels.com or whatever. And you'd also be able to find that website on a search engine by typing in that kind of keyword. And this process of DNS essentially launched the consumer internet. It made it possible for search engines and popular websites to even form and get going. And I think this is all, this was, a brilliant innovation. And there were, multiple different groups launching domain registries. There was .org was pretty early in there. .com was pretty early. And what wound up happening is there was a need to make sure that all these different systems didn't collide with each other, because if you've got two different .coms, you won't know which one's real. Users can be endangered, et cetera, et cetera. And so ICANN formed out of this as a way to prevent collisions and kind of create a standard for the system. And at the time, this was really a really valuable, really important thing. And I think that ICANN has been critical in the growth of the internet. The issue is more around the infrastructure itself. The infrastructure itself is custodial. So ICANN gives you .com essentially a license, like a 10-year license to sell .com domains. They can take that license away from you, meaning that the registry could change ownership. But the domains themselves can be taken by .com. .com, owned by VeriSign, can take a domain away from you. And you're required to store your domain with GoDaddy or some other registrar, and they can take the domain away from you. So there's multiple different groups of people that have a say in this system. And that's the kind of background and the reason why, we think that, blockchains have a role to play here is because they don't have a system like this. It's not custodial like this system. So I know that's a lot, but.
Well, there must be some benefits for having a centralized service issuing the registrars and the domains.
I think initially it was more that there wasn't really another option. There wasn't a way to issue and transfer assets trustlessly. So you basically had to rely on some group of people controlling some set of servers saying, here's the record of who owns what. I guess one of the benefits is that it's easy if there is, some sort of illegal content or whatever else, it's easy to take it offline, although it's really not that easy because people can just keep launching it on other sites and things like that. But that's a benefit of having a system that can be that is custodial and therefore can be censored.
Well, I mean, there must be. I mean, there's always content that people aren't going to like that they think should be brought down. You know, whether it's in a gray area or whether it's in a completely illegal area. I mean, there are varying levels to where content probably should be taken off of the internet, right?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I think that it's more a matter of how architecture works. So, in the same way that cryptocurrency eliminates the need for a custodian and creates more secure money, blockchain domains, which is what we build, are doing that for DNS. So, it's basically that the infrastructure itself, the architecture of the system itself, does not enable any one person, any one group, any one company to be able to decide what's okay to say and not to say, or do and not to do. And I think that's pretty critical, because if you look at what happened with cryptocurrencies, there were all kinds of groups, people, all kinds of gatekeepers, all kinds of things that were keeping people away from being able to use basic things like bank accounts, payment systems, etc. So a huge percentage of the population around the world was excluded from this system. I think the same is true for DNS, where there are all types of things that you can't do. And the other problem that you get with all of this is that if you pick some group of people and say you're in charge, you can decide what's okay and what's not okay, then ultimately, like, it's going to be very hard for that group of people to not come under undue pressure over time. Like you mentioned, US government, other governments, and things like that. Like, because they have this power, they are then going to be forced to use it and maybe, worst case scenario, abuse it because of the way the system is designed. And we don't think that there's any need for that. Like, at the base layer, the most secure system you can have is one system where a user controls their asset. A user can add information, meaning a user can launch a website, put it out there, and then applications can say, hey, this is unethical, this is illegal, this is dangerous, whatever, and then they can not show it. And when you do it this way, you wind up ensuring that the voices and the people out there that are at risk of being silenced won't be silenced. But you can still get rid of all the really bad stuff that you don't want to have on there. So I think there's a way to get all of the advantages essentially of the existing system plus some, while at the same time protecting free speech. And I think that's the critical thing here, that I think we realize, and part of the reason why we've been fixating on this problem is the way the current internet works. It is really good for stifling free speech around the world, and there are just all kinds of cases of this. The .cat registry, which was launched in Catalonia, promoting the independence movement there, was shut down by the Spanish government, and all the websites were taken offline. When a new Libyan government came in, they started regulating the morality of all .ly websites around the world. So there were Canadian porn companies that were getting shut down and things like that. So the way the internet works enables all of these random people to decide what's okay to say and what's okay not to say. And it's an unnecessary design. It's unnecessarily insecure. And so that's the reason why we think it's a good thing.
I mean, part of the reason that we have laws to define what's legal and not legal is that they come from a general consensus of the populace of what's right and wrong. Now, there are kind of edges and gray areas where people may not agree, but I think there are some probably pretty heinous things that should be kept illegal, right? Do you agree with that?
Well, of course, this doesn't change any of that. In fact,
I understand. But so if that's the case, then there is a purpose for having a regulating body to maintain the rules and regulations that are set up by a democratically elected government, right?
no, because the internet is a universal thing, and there is no universal body that can adjudicate that stuff. So it's not practical, it's not possible, it's not currently being done, and what's being done instead is it's getting used to silence people who powerful people around the world don't agree with. And that is the inevitable output of any system that has one small group of people or one person or one company in charge.
Well,
So
I'm not talking. I don't want to talk about like things which may be political speech. Like, what's the worst thing that you can think of that could be put
Well,
on the internet?
how do you program that? That's the thing. The whole
Well,
point here is that you have to decide whether you want a custodian, a decider, or not a decider, because there's no way to program in this is not okay, this is not okay. So you have to wind up trusting somebody. That's the whole crux of this argument. Who do
right,
we
but that's the point. That's the point of having courts and a justice system, though, right?
All that stuff still works. All that stuff still works because what winds up happening is you need an application in order to view websites. So your browser is going to say, I'm not going to show this record. This is illegal. Or your browser is going to say, you should watch out for this website. It might be a phishing attempt or whatever. All of that can still happen. And in fact, all of this still happens on the second layer right now because what happens right now is I post content and then YouTube or Facebook or whomever needs to decide what is the line. Is this okay or is this not okay? It's actually not even a government body that's doing it today, really. It's applications that are having to do it. And applications are having to do it right now in silos. And what's going to happen in the future is applications are going to be able to share those records. They're going to be able to say, they're not going to need to have thousands of people staring at all kinds of awful content and deciding where the line of free speech is. They're going to be able to rely on a collective list of this. And that's one of the other huge benefits you get from having these systems, having these records on a blockchain versus having it inside of these silos, which I think is another big piece of
But
the problem.
but then you're just switching the responsibility of maintaining which websites are acceptable from a regulated body or a regulated enforcement agency to a browser to a private company.
That's inaccurate. It's already going through private companies. It's going through private companies like VeriSign. It's going through private whoown.com, or it's going through private companies like the registrars, or it's going through private companies like YouTube or Facebook. The government is not going through every single website and saying this one's okay, this one's not okay. They're absolutely relying on private companies currently. The difference
But
is,
but the but the companies are guided by the rules and regulations of the United States government and the FCC, correct?
and it'll be the identical thing in the blockchain world. There's no difference.
But what happens if somebody comes along? Okay, so one of the points about your domains, right, is that they can't be seized. So what happens if somebody comes along and posts some illegal content on their website, which goes against what could be considered acceptable content?
Applications won't show the record, so it'll effectively disappear from the internet. And anybody who goes and views it through another tool will be breaking the law, just like today.
Right, but how do like don't you have to get a court order first to go? How do the applications actually? I'm guessing in your case to be like Opera, right? How would Opera figure out that okay, we need to blacklist this website?
You mean what is the mechanism for them to become aware, or what is the mechanism for them to actually do it?
I mean both.
So the mechanism for them to actually do it is quite easy. They just essentially add a little piece of code that says this domain or these domains cannot be resolved. And it's pretty easy. It's something that applications are already working with us on because these types of problems come up quick. People try to do phishing attempts or whatever else. So that's just sort of how it goes. It's just
Right,
a thing you need to figure out.
right, but the data is still there, correct?
The data is still there on the blockchain.
Okay, so don't you think like if I've been involved in some I mean, don't you think there should be ways for people to have information deleted though, and that there shouldn't be a permanent record somewhere? Let's say because just because it's not accessible through um, the browser doesn't mean that other smarter people with a bit of coding experience couldn't go and access it some other way.
I do not believe that tools should be the determinants of what's okay and what's not okay. Meaning that the design of the tools themselves prevent this. So it'd be the equivalent of saying, I buy a car, and I have rules in the car that make it so it is impossible for me to do any number of things that would be illegal. Now, it would be great if we could magically design the car to work that way, but that's not the way that ownership of things works. So you have to decide, does it make sense for me to attempt to censor all behavior in advance? And is that even possible? versus having a system that deals with it on the second layer. And right now on the internet, most problems are also dealt with on the second layer, like Facebook, YouTube, etc. They're not dealt with on the base layer already. So it's really kind of like an architecture question. What is the safest system? And I think the safest system is one where users control their domains. Users decide which websites, whether or not their website goes up or down, and then applications can decide, and users and viewers of those websites can decide whether or not it's something that should be out there or not. And right now what we have is we have all kinds of websites, all kinds of free speech being violated and suppressed around the world using the takedown of domain names and websites. So I think the moral argument is pretty clear. You need to be on the side of censorship resistant tools, because the other side is what's being used to violate people's rights. So if you want to pick a side ethically, I think it's pretty clear.
I don't think so, because I think there's some content which should be removed.
I agree, and will
but it shouldn't.
To make sure that it disappears from the disappears from the internet as much as possible. But it's a question about architecture, and
Right, but don't you think, like, if I'm a victim of something, let's say my personal data is leaked somewhere and it's very compromising to me, don't you think I should be able to engage the justice system to have that information removed so it doesn't become a threat to me later on, or is not compromising my personal privacy in any way?
You'll be able to do exactly that. There's really no difference. You'll be able to do exactly that. And it's the same thing where, like, let's say you have, let's say that, take that example of that content, you have the right to take it off the internet. Well, what if a person still is storing it on their own device, which the government can't touch, right? That court order can't touch some random person. Then they go and put it back out there. So what you wind up having to do, regardless, with the current internet, is you wind up having to say, hey, courts, you need to prevent any of these applications from supporting this content. And that's exactly what happens in the current internet. It's exactly what's going to happen in a future decentralized web as well, where applications are going to be forced via court order not to show this record, and it's going to disappear from the internet effectively.
But it doesn't actually disappear. I mean, it's somewhere on a server somewhere tucked away, right? So if the person, let's say the person that you said downloaded it onto his phone, there's still an IP record of that. If it's illegal content and it's considered to be something that the person shouldn't have, I mean, the police can always go after them and have them delete it as well too, and maybe arrest them. And
the identical is still true in this world too. There's no difference.
Right. So, but I'm just saying that, even though the browser deletes something, it still exists, right? You could still access it.
The police can still go and find the individual who actually did the thing and force them and tell them that they must delete it, or they can go and get their device, or anybody else who has the content, which is exactly how it happens now with anybody who takes the content offline. So it's really more of a conceptual thing. Like if it disappears from 99.99% of the internet, so everyone is effectively safe, and the trade-off you get is that you no longer have these cases where powerful people around the world can suppress free speech, is that a better design of a system? And that's really the question you have to ask yourself.
Right, but I was saying there's some illegal content which should be deleted, and not just on a.
I agree with you. Philosophically, I agree with you, but it doesn't matter, because what we're saying is that the system itself has no mechanism for saying one specific type of content can be deleted, another specific type of content can't be deleted, without involving a person, which then decides, which then gets corrupted, which then violates free speech, which then leads to authoritarianism and leads to the world that we're going towards today. So I think it's a moral imperative that we don't go down that path, and that's the reason why I'm working on this company. So that's my view.
Right, but if somebody's uploading child porn to some server or something, you probably don't want that kept there, because other people could come along and it just increases the amount of people who have access to it. And then I'm sure you've seen the statistics about what this sort of spread of this content leads to, or terrorist recruiting content or other things which are considered wholly illegal in our system of justice.
it just the current system doesn't stop the spread of those things either. So
Oh, it does. No, it does. No, no, no. I mean, the FBI has whole divisions that like hunt down people and put them in jail. I mean, it works because we find them and we put them in jail,
it
and
doesn't.
then
It's all over the internet. I don't. I think saying that that system works would be is. I think that's inaccurate. It definitely isn't working. It's all over the place. But the point is that regardless, you're still going to have to take those same steps. The nice thing about having a decentralized web is that you have more cooperation between applications. So what you have right now is you have each group in a silo, and then the government is completely overwhelmed because they need to go into all of these different little silos and say, "Hey, you got this bad stuff. Let's get rid of it. You know, it's on Reddit. It's over here. It's in all these different. It's on 4chan. It's all these different places. You have to go and find it." Whereas what you wind up having with blockchain records is you have this record that any application can read. So any application could go and read, oh, hey, there's this blacklist of all these bad websites, and then everybody can be sharing the same blacklist. So right now, Facebook and YouTube and 4chan and Reddit and everybody else has to do their own filtering. In the future, all of those applications can be cooperating and sharing records, and you're going to have a superpower that you don't have right now, where you're going to have a far safer internet. So I think it's actually completely the other way. I think this is a far safer internet than we have currently today. Yeah, not even close.
so what is required for someone to buy a domain on .crypto domain? Like, what sort of information do they have to give?
Nothing. You need to offer an email address on our site right now, but there are ways to buy directly through partners and things like that.
So if someone does break the law and you need to go find them, like how do you gain that information to go after them?
So we're not law enforcement. We don't. That's not something that we do. You talk about law enforcement? How would law enforcement go after them?
No, I'm just saying, like, don't you think there should be a registry of persons identifying information to associate with them with the website that
Absolutely
they
not.
create?
Absolutely not. I think the most critical problem that humanity faces right now is that free speech is being violated all across the planet. And that if you forced people to identify themselves, then they would not be able to safely spread news and information that is currently not getting out. So
Well, that's not the case, right? Because if you're stopped by a police officer, they can ask you for your ID, right?
we're in a big world, though. There are people living in places like China and Russia and Iran and all kinds of places where the dynamics are completely different, where free speech is violated, and it's not just about doing things that you and I both think are morally reprehensible. It's about people standing up for their basic rights.
I've already brought up a few examples. You always come back to like political speech, but political speech is just one part of a many faceted aspect when it comes to free speech. And free speech is a very complex topic as well, too, because you can't just say anything that you want, right? Something that's like libelous or slanderous can land you under prosecution, or publishing other things which could be deemed illegal if they're inciting violence or doing other things. That sort of free speech isn't allowed. So that, yes, you can express your political views, but telling someone to go kill somebody is illegal. The permanent record of data, you can have anonymous speech without having permanent speech. I think is one of the points that I want to make. Where if you always talk about architecture, there's ways of having anonymous speech which doesn't have a permanent, doesn't reside permanently in some data server somewhere or on a blockchain somewhere.
That's potentially accurate. I don't know exactly how that would work, but that's theoretically possible.
So when it comes to being able to delete information about you, do you agree with GDPR that you should be able to delete information about yourself from?
Absolutely. And this is about the user. So the user can change records. The user can get rid of this information. It's that a third party can't. So I can put up my website. I can take down my website. You can't take down my website.
Right, but what if you steal my information and then you publish it, and then it's my information that you've published? Do I have any rights to have that information be taken off?
Of course you do. You have all legal rights that you have in whatever society or country you live in. Nothing changes. This does not change the law in any way, shape, or form.
But how would I do it technically? You keep mentioning that I'd have to go to like Opera and write them a letter, right? And just say like, is that the way to do it? How I'd
Right
get
now, what
it?
happens? Right now, what happens is that unless it is just a slam dunk illegal, and I would say that in most cases, even when it is slam dunk illegal, you literally need to go today to every single application, and people who are victims of non-consensual pornography and all sorts of other things find themselves having to go to every single application that that content is posted on, rather than a system where you have global blacklists that applications all across the world can use. And then you're going to wind up having a case where all you need to do is get onto one thing. And that's far better than the way that it works in the current system. And it's also far better than the way that it works when law enforcement gets involved. So there is a much brighter future for individual protections in cases where something bad happens in a decentralized web than in the current web. The decentralized web is going to be far safer, not even close, far safer.
Yeah, but this doesn't exist yet, though, right?
It doesn't. That's what we're working on.
Ah, okay. So I mean, but these are just general ideas then, rather than something that's been put into practice.
You mean which part?
I mean, the ability to have data put on this blacklist.
So there, from a technical perspective, that is extremely easy. The only reason it doesn't exist yet is because the problem hasn't occurred yet. And the day the problem occurs will be the day that we start working on the solution. So yes, it is not far away. This tech is super early. So we launched our first registries the end of 2019. Got our first batch, maybe 7,000 websites that have gone live in 2020. We've got Opera browser for Android and a couple of extensions. It's mostly enthusiasts building right now. It is theoretical in the sense that it doesn't yet replace the existing web. The decentralized web is
Mm-hmm.
tiny, but as it matures, it has a lot more tools in its toolbox to solve the problems that you're talking about than the current internet. And you're going to wind up being far safer and far happier with the decentralized web than you are with the traditional web, especially with the set of concerns that you're talking about.
So one of the things that did occur in relation to trading was that the SEC and the U.S. government came out and said that even if somebody's running a decentralized exchange, which is allowing for people to engage in the trading of securities, even though the exchange couldn't be shut down, is that the developers and other people who were engaged in providing, upgrading the code and were responsible for actually managing the platform could be liable for the activities taking place on that platform.
And that
So,
makes good sense for two reasons. Because, first of all, it's a platform where users are going to actually engage in the activity. And second of all, their tools are specifically designed to enable somebody to make trades between specific pairs, some pairs of which would be SEC violations. So I think that that analysis makes complete sense. Now, where what we're doing falls in is similar to other cases which have already been adjudicated in the United States. For example, things like, is it the fault of a car owner, of a car seller, if I sell you a car and then you go and use it to run someone over? Or if I sell you a gun and I have no reason to assume that you intend to harm anybody and you do. And these cases have been adjudicated well over decades in the United States. And no, you as the seller of that item do not have responsibility unless you had knowledge that they intended to use it for harm. And if we had knowledge that somebody intended to use a domain for harm, we would not be okay with that, and we would try to stop that.
well, no, I mean, but those are like instrumental tools, right? And
Same thing with a domain name.
right, and so is the domain name as well too. It points you in the right direction, but like so when you buy an address, right? So you buy an address, you don't have to have any identity or anything else associated with it. Where are you storing your data? It's an IPFS, right? And how are the sites set up?
Yeah. So what you're doing is you have your domain name. Your domain name is a ERC 721 token. It's like an NFT on a blockchain. So you're storing the domain name in your wallet, and this is the reason why you, as the user, have control over it. And then you are signing a message with your private key and you're writing your IPFS hash to the domain. And so you're uploading your website on IPFS, and then you're linking it to your domain, and then people are able to go and find it from there.
But there's like limits on what IPFS can provide in your data structures. So I've seen a lot of the websites that have been built on IPFS, and I don't think they include like JavaScript or any of the other kind of more modern tools that are used in web development.
You can use some. There are some sort of limitations around the edges right now, and that's it's just it's early days for decentralized storage. So it's not performance ready to go and move Netflix over yet or anything like that. It still has limitations, but those are I think there's no reason to think that those will not be ironed out.
How do you see the data storage working out in the future? Is this moving to something like Filecoin or Swarm on Ethereum? Like which tech stack are you guys looking at?
So IPFS is what we're using the most, and I don't think there's any specific reason to assume that IPFS won't be able to continue to evolve. I think there's they're doing an amazing job. We're in general network agnostic. Like we think that users should be able to use whatever they want, or maybe even launch copies of their websites on multiple networks at the same time. So we're imagining something of an agnostic, of sort of a storage network agnostic future. But it's a little too early to say, which, how that market plays out in general. But for us, we're just looking for decentralized storage providers that we can offer to our users.
Is there any way to have like a mixed like a hybrid mixture where you could offer the DNS without IPFS?
What do you mean?
Well, were you able to own your domain and have something that points to it, but have I was talking about like the limitations of the data, right? Where you can't use JavaScript or some other of the more modern tools which are used in web development. Is there like a hybrid version where you can host some of the information on a like your own server or
Sure.
something
Sure.
other than IPFS?
And I wouldn't even consider that a hybrid version. I mean, that's still a decentralized website. You're storing the content on your own server. You still have control. You could also even store it on Amazon Web Services and just point your domain name. Now, the problem with the Amazon Web Services one is that then you don't really have a censorship resistant website because Amazon Web Services can just turn you off. So it's a matter of what your goal is, but you can certainly the blockchain domain is extremely flexible. So you could point it to anything.
And then point it to anything and then have it run. So there's like different levels of how you can use the domain. Because I think like a lot of people may be interested in censorship resistant websites, but they don't actually need it in the end. Just like with anonymity as well too, is that a lot of people say they want anonymity, but then they give up gobs of data about their IP and a bunch of other information which could be associated with them through metadata analysis.
And I think that's true. I think most people in the world, don't need to worry about. Well, I shouldn't say most people. I think maybe half the people or so in the world don't need to worry about censorship resistance per se. But I think the number of people that need to worry about it around the world is going up. And you also have the system itself just works completely differently. So it actually is also it's also more performant. A traditional domain name takes 60 days before you can set it up when you take possession of it. A blockchain domain name, takes 30 seconds, a minute, whatever the length of time it takes for the blockchain transaction to go through. You can also transfer it in 30 seconds or a minute. You can also transfer it without an escrow agent. You can do all kinds of secure things that you couldn't do otherwise. We also imagine that decentralized storage networks are likely going to wind up being cheaper and have better uptime than traditional storage because you're essentially accessing a marketplace of everybody's storage space around the world, as opposed to just going to Amazon and seeing what's the cost. So there's definitely going to be benefits to everyone, just like how it was with the internet itself, where the internet promised free information can't be censored, et cetera, et cetera. But what really wound up happening is that most people didn't need to use that specific feature, censorship resistance, but they did need to use or did want to use speed, better access to information, all these tools. I think there's a lot of reasons why people are going to use the decentralized web besides just that. But censorship resistance is the core thing that is different from the old system that causes people to migrate. And I think it's exactly like what happened with cryptocurrencies,
So
where it's not that every single person is getting their bank account shut down or can't access a bank account, but this new system that provides censorship resistant money also provides all these other benefits because of it.
So have you guys had your like WikiLeaks moment where someone has come out and published explosive information yet?
No,
Okay, I mean, has it happened on any of the services?
I'm not that I'm aware of.
Okay, because like for that type of information right now, like where would that information be held? Like in
IPFS.
IPFS, or they use like a pastebin account or something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's going to be like the reasons that people move over? I mean, other than just censorship resistance, like what are the other like uh, what will be some of the other like driving forces for people to adopt this technology?
Well, so you've got uptime, you're going to have cost, and you've also got this sort of benefit of it being crypto native. So, for example, my blockchain domain, brad.crypto, is my payment gateway and it's my website at the same time. So it means that you can send me money to brad.crypto, and it means you could also go and check out my website, brad.crypto. And when you have this property, then you have the ability to confidently say, actually 100%, with 100% certainty say that whoever is showing me this website is the same person that I'm sending money to. And so it doesn't seem like the most revolutionary thing, but if you think about it, it creates an entirely new security model where payments no longer have these separate systems. You no longer need to go and move to other communication channels. So you have extra security, and I think that piece right there is going to lead to all types of new behavior and all kinds of new applications as well. Money is native to this internet. It was not native to the old internet.
Do you think it works better on a programmable blockchain, like a native programmable blockchain like Ethereum versus something like Bitcoin, where you'd have to do it on like a side chain?
Yeah. We don't. I mean, I think the sidechain stuff is really not performant enough to be able to handle a registry. And Ethereum is absolutely performant enough and has proven itself with our registry, but also plenty of other smart contract applications. So I think a smart contract blockchain is necessary.
I know there is competition with DNS, but how do they fit within your guys' business space?
So when we launched this company, the first thing we did was we built a registrar application on top of .eth. So it was like supposed to be kind of like a GoDaddy for .eth, and our goal always has been that we want to build tools to make the decentralized web easy to use, and we see that as kind of the biggest problem in the market. And so we started by building tools on top of .eth, realized that there were some issues in terms of the way the registry was designed, and we wanted to fix those. And so we determined that the best thing for us to do was to launch our own registries, and then launch those, and then build tools. And what we decided to do then was to build tools for .eth as well. So our library supports .eth. We have like easy tools for you to manage your domains, where you can add your crypto addresses and where you can add your IPFS hashes, and all of that stuff works for .eth too. So we love .eth. They're pioneers, and we're trying to support them in all of our tools and make it easy for the ecosystem to grow more generally. In the traditional world, there are definitely more than one registry, and we expect that we'll probably see the same thing in the blockchain world.
So if .eth is like close to the team and you guys are working together, then there is also Handshake, which debuted this year. How do you guys fit within? Would Handshake be a direct competitor then?
No, not really. So Handshake is weird. So the ENS has built a .eth registry, which is what we do. We build registries. Ethereum is the platform that we're both launching on. In the case of Handshake, Handshake is a platform. So they're actually trying to compete with Ethereum here and saying, hey, everybody, you should launch your registries on our blockchain. So that's a bit different.
Right, but it's a purpose specific blockchain specifically for domain registry.
Yeah, but they're not actually a domain registry. So Handshake is not a competitor to us. Handshake is a competitor to Ethereum, trying to get applications to build on top of them. Now somebody has to go and build an application, a registry on top of Handshake, and then compete. So that would be where the competition would come in.
I mean, so if you guys are domain agnostic, like you said, is that something? Have you looked at building anything on there?
Yeah, we just think it's a lot harder. It's a lot easier to do everything on Ethereum, and Ethereum's a lot further along. Ethereum also has all the integrations, meaning that domain names, they're ERC 721 tokens, so they work inside of apps like OpenSea, where you can just we didn't need to do barely needed to do any integration at all. They just work inside of all these apps. They also work for storage inside of Ethereum wallets that are dApp browsers, which enable you to easily make updates to your domains. So it's basically like if you build something on Ethereum, you just get this supercharging of your domain works inside of all these apps on day one. The ecosystem automatically supports it. With any other blockchain, you just have this gigantic, gigantic mountain to climb in order to get all these applications to support your blockchain. And broadly speaking, almost no blockchain other than Ethereum has been able to get there. And so, for example, with Opera has integrated Ethereum a while ago because they integrated an Ethereum wallet. So, it's going to be a tall order to get applications to then go and support another blockchain, especially an application specific blockchain, which doesn't give them all the same benefits. Like Ethereum enables them to offer domain names to their users, offer DeFi to their users, offer a cryptocurrency wallet to their users, all these other things. So I think it's a pretty big mountain to climb for really any other blockchain.
So is it just Opera that you've engaged with, or are you looking at like Brave or anything else?
Yeah, we're talking to several browsers right now. I think in general, browsers are pretty excited about this stuff. Pretty excited about the decentralized web in general. I mean, obviously the largest companies may have other like the companies that own the largest browsers may have other incentives in other parts of their business. But broadly speaking, the browser community is pretty excited about the decentralized web, and I think part of the reason why is because it's a lot closer to the original vision of the internet that everybody thought they were working on. They thought they were working on peer-to-peer protocols that were going to open up the internet to the world. And what we wound up with was a set of tools that are really being controlled by a very small handful of companies. And so this is an opportunity to kind of you know set the world right, set history right.
It's been really great to see the growth of Web3 over the past few years, to see how nascent it is and how much of a broad space it can try to make an impact on. I know that there's a lot of growing pains, and it's been interesting to see how the development goes. But I think it does have a lot of promise. It's just figuring out how to provide the service that drives people there to use it. So, with Ethereum, it was easy to get people to come to native Ethereum apps because they figure out how to provide interest to people through financial applications. So I guess the next step is to figure out how to effectively drive people to more decentralized websites, and to want them to come, to have them feel that they need to use this service, and if they weren't using it, then it would make their lives more difficult.
Hmm. I totally agree, and we are in the first inning. I mean, we joke all the time that for anybody that was building websites back in the 1990s, we're kind of in like the GeoCities phase. This is this is early stuff. We're in the kind of enthusiast phase. We're just now starting to see apps, and in particular dApps. And I think it makes sense that it would start with dApps because they're crypto native and because they have this problem. You know, they're trying to offer a decentralized application, meaning that a way for you to just interact directly with a smart contract But the way that you do that is through a DNS domain and a web hosting server that the owner doesn't control. So they have this reason, this need to turn their DApp into something that's fully decentralized. And so that's where we're seeing the stuff first. We're seeing like Kyber.crypto for Kyber Network. We're seeing Switch.io.crypto, MyEtherWallet.crypto for MyEtherWallet. So those are the things that we're seeing first, and I think that's to be expected. It's going to be crypto apps first. It's going to be probably these kind of like you know global free speech use cases second, and then it's going to be everyone else as these tools actually get better third, and then somewhere mixed in with all those phases, you'll start to see these kind of like viral websites that can do new things that other websites couldn't do that are driving people in.
You mentioned a couple of companies making the first steps here, but what do you think will be the real first driver of getting people on board? Or like, what have been some of the like? Have there been any companies or anything which you've seen have given like a noticeable uptick to sales for you guys?
Yeah, pretty much every big company weighing in, stepping in has generated a lot of new users, new excitement, new domain registrations, and new websites launched. So I think that the first real trigger here was stuff that we built, which was templates for non-technical users. And you can go to our website right now, and there's like you know a series of relatively simple website templates that enable you, without knowing how to code, to launch on IPFS, connect it to your domain name, and have a website up and functioning. So I think that was kind of step one, where we started to see a whole lot of activity around this. Step two was Opera. Opera was probably the biggest jolt in the sense that it made a whole bunch of, there's 80 million monthly active users on Opera for Android. So, that's that's the biggest increase in eyeballs to the decentralized web probably ever. And so that got a whole bunch of people excited. When MyEtherWallet and Kyber launched, those also got people pretty excited and spurred a whole bunch of other websites and applications working. But I think the next stage after that is, it's going to be a continuation of people building top websites, and a continuation of more integrations. And I think that you can expect things like more browser tools, more browsing tools, search engine support, and those types of things will probably be the next big drivers.
I mean, do you think that people use it as kind of a backup for their own websites?
Yeah, I think that's a very natural use case, and it's one that a lot of like right now we're in this phase where it's a pretty big topic of conversation in the crypto community because of YouTube. And YouTube has been taking down the pages of various YouTubers, and in many cases not even explaining why or what they did or whether they violated a policy or not. It's not even clear. And so now they're very concerned, and they're looking for ways to, at the very least, back up their content, and maybe post it and display it, and market it in other places. Some people are taking it to their personal websites as an intermediary step, but everyone's just kind of looking around, trying to figure out what to do. And so step one, I think, is back it up, and then step two is find alternate places to display it. Sorry, not to display it, for people to find it for discovery.
Yeah, for people to find it, because without proper web crawler support, then it just kind of remains hidden away, right?
Yeah, yeah, and this is the problem and the opportunity with something like the decentralized web. The problem is that you actually need to rebuild everything, and then the opportunity is that you get to rebuild everything. There's all kinds of new businesses that are going to launch here. There's all kinds of new ways that you can design things, and we also have the benefit. Like, it's not like when we built the first internet. When we built the first internet, we had no corollary. We had nothing to look at. Now, when we're building this new internet, we can look at the old one, and we can pick out the things that we like and the things that we don't like. We've got all kinds of applications that are pretty mature, like search engines and browsers and others. So we don't need to recreate. Like, when you launch the first web, every search engine and every browser needed to be built from scratch. Now all we need is for those tools to start supporting this new internet, and they can do so at the same time as they support the old one. They don't need to pick. They can support them both simultaneously. So I think we're going to start to see the decentralized web creep in to the point where, like, a lot of users may not even fully distinguish when they're looking at content for a while. There might be this sort of like, fax machine, sending, fax machine generating an email for you type phase, this sort of like in between phase where we're using tools that are connecting in the old with the new until eventually we just kind of, toss out the old system and replace it entirely with the new because it's that much better. But I think that future for the decentralized web is, 10 years or more away. I think it's going to take quite a while to build out all the stuff. But the nice thing is there are a lot of people that are earnestly excited about it and want it to happen and are helping to make it happen. So that's what's been motivating to me recently is just how many different people have started building on stuff just in 2020.
No, I mean, it seems like there's an opportunity that's right for a company to come in and provide not just the templates, but help people get these sites set up, almost like what a GoDaddy does, or some of the other sites where they provide the building tools, and then you just have to come in and provide the content.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I guess that's part of building the ecosystem of partners that you would have in connection with Unstoppable Domains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. How big is the team now?
We are 24.
24, right? And I mean, is COVID affecting the business at all?
It's weird. We maybe thought that it was going to more. What happened initially is, whenever there was that first kind of, big shock and awareness on, I think that was maybe around March 10th or something like that. There was kind of like there was a disruption. Everybody was, I mean, even me, I wasn't focused. I was looking at the news and, counting cases of sick people and things like that. So there was a couple of days there where we saw a drop off, but pretty soon after that, it picked back up again, and we can't really put our finger on much of a difference, which I know is bizarre, but I think at least in the crypto community more broadly, like we were mostly digital, mostly remote already. Been living my whole life on Zoom for the past year anyway, almost. So it's this there's this weird quality of like everything's different, but day to day not that different. So it's a strange thing.
Do you think there'll be lasting dynamic changes in San Francisco and in that area?
I do. I think San Francisco was a very difficult place to live before all of this. And the thing that was kind of holding it all together was the fact that, essentially, I don't want to say almost all of, the top tech companies and almost all of the top, you know, tech thinkers were either in San Francisco or in the Bay. And as a result, it was really important to be there to be, to hang out with everybody. And I think that was the thing that I loved about the city was, I would go out to dinner parties and I would meet all these super interesting people, or I was very easy to find them, or I'd be waiting in line at a coffee shop and I would start having some, crazy, conversation about the future with some other, startup person. So like that energy, was what drew me to the city. But on the flip side, it's dirty, absurdly expensive, and, maybe not the safest. And if we lose that first quality of I can go and hang out with all of these interesting tech people, if they're not there anymore, or at least not in a critical mass, then I don't know what happens. So people keep asking me, are you going back? And I honestly just don't know right now, which is just totally bizarre thing to say that you would have just never heard from me, even 3 months ago. So
Yeah. Isn't there an incentive for companies if they can move out of an office and go fully remote to do that?
totally. And that's the thing about it is like, I mean, for workers, like being able to be remote, like, you can get a lot more bang for your buck in almost every other city. So, you don't, either your San Francisco salary either goes way further, or you don't even feel like you need as big of a salary in order to support yourself. So that's a big change for workers. And then from the company's perspective, you now have access to, workers all over the world, and you don't need to pay for these crazy expensive offices. So I think there's pressure both from the employer and from the worker side to say like, maybe we don't, maybe we don't set up offices again. So I think for us, we probably will set up. We've got international offices. So we have one office in Kiev, for example, and I think we may open up there. We may open up in other places. may open up in San Francisco again. It's just the I think people's perception of it now has so quickly changed. Where like having a purely remote working life is now something that everyone's considering, and previously that was something that 10% or 20% of people were considering. And I know that Twitter has already said, we're closing essentially for good, and they're one of the biggest employers in San Francisco. So I think that's the beginning of this trend. And in some ways, like I mean, I like to be around people, so I'm a little worried, but at the same time, I'm also kind of excited that there's all this geographic flexibility now. Maybe our team gets together once every other month or something like that, and they go on a trip together or something. I don't know exactly what the future is going to look like, but I'm a little I'm I'm a little excited to see what that version of work is going to be like.
I'm wary actually because one of the things that Facebook came out and said was that you can go work remote and you can live somewhere else, but we're going to adjust your salary. And
Right.
so us as the big corporation where labor costs are a big part of our operating expense, or sorry, our expenses, it makes sense for them to push their workforce out of the most expensive place to live in the entire world, and in San Francisco.
Well, I
And
just I just want all those workers to know that we will welcome you with open arms. Please, please let us know. We would love any Facebook engineers that feel like they're being mistreated. We will not do that to you, and you'll be working on a decentralized web instead of a centralized one. So that's exciting. Facebook should keep treating workers badly, and maybe we'll have greater opportunities for startups.
it seems that Facebook's really having problems internally recently. At least their opinion that they should not be regulating political speech or stopping any political ads has really put a lot of people off in the company.
It's a weird place they're in. I mean, that's the reason why being a content platform like they are, is just it's the problem with owning people's data. If you had some system where the users own their own data, you would have a completely different dynamic. So it's this is a problem they bought with their data controlling business model.
It's necessary for them. Same for Google and Netflix and pretty much any of the tech companies. They use their data analytics to build a better picture of their customers so that they can sell more things to them.
You could still do the analytics though without controlling the data, and that's the core. And I think that's actually one of the core ideas of the decentralized web too, is that you're going to change the ownership structure where Facebook doesn't own the data. You own the data. You give Facebook access to it, and then Facebook can do their analytics and they can provide you a service. But YouTube can design algorithms to try to help you figure out which video you should watch. But they're not the ones that store the video, meaning they're not the ones that get to decide you know who can take it who can take it down or not.
That kind of ties in with convenience, where dedicated data hosting like that, video hosting, especially if you're getting views on videos, is really expensive. And so I think a lot of people like lose sight of the costs that Google's spending to gather all this data. I mean, it works out for them. They get billions of hours of video that they can analyze and piece together better algorithmic identities of their customers and also the people watching it. And it probably does make sense for them to run YouTube with all the ad revenue that they get through it.
Yeah, I think it's a good business model, but it's a Web 2 business model, and I think a future business model is going to need to evolve. It's going to need to monetize, showing good content to users, showing the right content to users, and they're going to lose this sort of monopoly because the fact that YouTube stores the videos means that there's no portability, so you're stuck inside of YouTube's app. Whereas in the future, if you control the data, if you control those videos and you store them yourself, and then you're giving YouTube or YouTube's access to it, you're going to wind up having a much better competitive landscape and much better applications for users, and you're going to also help solve the censorship problem at the same time.
That's probably a great place to wrap up on. I think we've covered a lot. Do you want to talk a little bit about Unstoppable Domains again, and just let everybody know how to find you?
Yeah, for sure. So Unstoppable Domains builds blockchain domain names. So we have two registries, .crypto and .zil. We've had 220,000 domain registrations so far, just under 8,000 websites launched. If you want to check out more, learn more, look for domains, you can go to unstoppabledomains.com. I would also encourage you to follow us on Twitter at UnstoppableWeb. You can find all of our updates and hear all the latest. And please come build.
Correct. Well, Brad, thank you for coming on. I really appreciated it.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. I want to thank Brad for coming on. It was really nice to have him here. Also, the baby made an appearance, if you didn't notice already. Yeah, she's a barrel of monkeys. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in to another episode of The End of the Chain. I really appreciate you all listening to this podcast and making it what it is. We have a growing community, and you guys are great. I really want to thank you again. Nothing on the podcast should be taken for financial advice, and I will see you in the next episode.